What's happening, gang? Live back in the Secret Stash. I'm your host, Jesse Ibanez, co-founder of the Greenhouse Group, located right down here in the heart of San Diego, helping folks get into and out of homes and moving people with purpose. And by the way, if you're looking for a couple homes, we launched 3 this week, gentlemen.
Wow.
And like one of them is a brand new remodel, kind of sexy in an up-and-coming neighborhood. The other one's in Forest Ranch, and you got to like beg, borrow, and steal to get one in Forest Ranch right now.
Yeah.
It's actually the most efficient design. And then the third one is a beautiful little condo. Actually, I could probably hit it from a rock right here from the studio in the heart of San Diego. Check out all of our featured listings over at thegreenhousegroupinc.com. And in the studio today, we're talking shop. We're all shopped up here. We got business stuff on the agenda, contracts. We're talking money with 2 powerhouses locally. We got attorney from a CPA firm, Charles Williams. What do you typically do down there? Because you're just basically helping people get out of jail or avoid getting out of jail with the numbers, right?
I don't think we do too many of those. That's we usually leave that up to the attorneys, but we definitely help with that too as well.
Yeah, fair enough. Thanks, Charles, for hanging out in the stash, sharing your wisdom around this topic of contracts and avoiding such a simple, making complex business situations simple. Easy for me to say. Carl Yaege, Hickman Robinson LLP. You guys holding down business real estate law in downtown San Diego, right?
In Merrill Lynch building, 13th floor.
HickmanRobinsonLaw.com. And by the way, Charles, I forgot to give you a shout out. You're at FriedmanBrannon.com. Gentlemen, the concept of overcommitting. This is one that's great. I love it because in my practice in residential real estate, I feel like this is the game. This is like the modus operandi.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people will shove their stepmothers down flights of stairs to make themselves look good contractually and actually get into and then they kind of feel like once they got them. Mm-hmm. You know, then they're kind of holding the seller hostage to appraisal and all this stuff. And it's true because it's hard to kind of unwind after they've got money in the deal.
Mm-hmm.
So in your guys' game, you know, what's this concept of overcommitting and in your reference, not overcommitting and why it's such an essential part of making complex business situations simple? I'll start with you, Charles.
Sure. One of the things that we see a lot, obviously people buy homes around San Diego, especially in the real estate market the way it is now.
Yeah.
You know, the statement that you're going to give your mortgage lender, it tends to look a little different than your tax return. So you want to make sure that you want to make sure those things line up. And when you talk about overcommitment, you just want to make sure that you're not putting yourself out there too far. And like you've realized in doing real estate is you can see what you can afford and what you can't afford. And when it comes to contract formation, even more importantly, is you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, I guess you'd say.
Mm-hmm. So say more about that, or say that in a different way.
Sure. So one of the things that we mentioned in the earlier part of the segment was personal guarantee. It's pretty easy to sign on to a personal guarantee, not knowing the other parties, not knowing the contract, not seeing the map. So when you sign on to it, you want to make sure that you know what you're getting into. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and in my game, everything's a personal guarantee. Like,
right.
They won't even really let you do entity lending unless you've got all the cash yourself, you know, to pick up property. So, but in your game, it's a little bit different, right? You got corporations that are kind of moving these pieces around and stuff like that. So what's the corollary of personal guarantee in a typical transaction you're dealing with?
Absolutely. So one of the things that you're going to talk about, we talked about, you're going to have 2 partners maybe in your own business. If you're going to be the partner that signs on to that personal guarantee, you want to make sure that you're not dealing with the gentleman, the fly-by-nighter, who's going to skate out and just leave it all out there. So aside from personal guarantees, I don't know if you have anything you want to touch on, Kyle?
Sure. So, you know, in terms of the concept of overcommitment, I'm going to play off of what Jesse gave us in terms of, you know, people stretching to make themselves look really good on paper. I'm used to seeing, in the context of those transactions, not only are they stretching to make themselves look good on paper, but they're stretching to actually make it so that they can purchase the property itself. And it's important to run through and make sure that you actually have the cash flow to support the purchase, because there are lots of people that, they get, they fall in love with a particular house or a particular contract, and they don't stop to look and say, what are my real expenses? What are my real abilities here? And they find themselves midway through the contract where they look down hard at the numbers and realize, oh, wait, I can't perform.
Yeah.
And that makes for a real mess.
Well, Tony Romo, it could actually be the Tony Romo, but probably not. Tony with an I, Romo, 104952 on Twitter. By the way, you guys, we're streaming this whole show live right now over on Meerkat. So if you want to see how dapper and handsome these two gentlemen look, all the ladies out there. Oh, you're all
I had somebody tell me I had a face for radio this morning.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. But here, Tony Romo asked a great question, though. He said, how do I not get sacked? No, never mind. He says, I was wondering if Kyle and Charles, what Kyle and Charles's thoughts regarding the impact of net investment income tax on trust returns.
Wow.
Thanks, Tony.
Wow, Tony. Talking about making complex business concepts simple. That is probably going to take up the rest of the hour to...
well, just one thought on it then. Just one thought on it.
Okay, so you want to cover since you're the tax guy,
Sure,
and then I'll chime in.
And
Cool.
Plus, I know Tony, so I know that what she's doing here.
Oh, you know Tony.
Oh, it's a gimme question.
It's a plug. A plant, I mean.
So I appreciate that. Thanks, Tony.
Yeah.
What the net investment income tax is a new tax that was about a couple years ago, and one of the things that you want to make sure it's when you're doing an investment, there's a different taxing scheme that comes out when you have an active business investment versus a passive business investment.
Mm-hmm.
So in our case,
And really quickly, just in case someone doesn't understand
Sure.
that, what's the delineation between those two?
Sure thing. So what we have two different owners. One is has a regular job. Let's say an ESPN executive.
Okay.
And they own a bunch of real estate just as a portfolio holding.
Okay, got it.
That's passive.
Got it.
And so the net investment income tax is going to attach to something that's going to be sold that's passive.
Okay.
As opposed to if you're actively in real estate and you're doing your job and that's your main job,
Got it.
and you buy that same property, that's active, and so that tax would not attach. Thank you very much, Tony, though. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Tony, you totally outdid yourself,
Yeah.
Tony. I don't know if that actually qualifies. Could a plant question qualify?
I think they had the right person's name plug the question for ESPN Radio.
Oh, of course.
I know. That was actually pretty awesome. Very good. So back on track. Unless there's anything else you want to add to Tony's.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Okay, good.
I think that was intended for a particular guest.
Fair enough. Overcommitment. We all
Yes. agreed
this was like a chief on that list.
Mm-hmm.
So what else? I mean, the concept of this being something where you're avoiding what can be very complex things and making them kind of simple.
Sure. I'll take it out of the real estate context and put it into a normal business transaction context.
Okay.
Playing off of the tax angle here, people regularly, when they're doing private transactions without the advice of a professional, forget about the tax impact of their transaction, and they get a big fat tax deal, especially if they're 1099 at the end of the year. Big fat tax bill. You need to not commit 100% of your resources to a transaction, especially if you're doing it without experienced advisors, because there are going to be those surprises on the back end, and it can cause the whole house of cards to come falling down. If you've overcommitted on the front end of the transaction and you don't have a buffer to handle for those unexpected charges, you're setting yourself up for failure and then a dispute about who's responsible for that failure.
So what I'm hearing you say then is it kind of goes back to the planning element, which was a sort of thread or a takeaway from the last element of the people involved, which is getting good help early on in the process will help you kind of get out of the way yourself.
Or to the extent you're handling it on your own, be sure that you aren't 100% committed. You've got some resources to deal with those unexpected bumps.
Yeah, fair enough. I don't know about you guys, but in my game in real estate, a lot of people, because the rates are so low, they like trying to bite off as much as they can chew. And yeah, you can't fault them for it. I mean, it's like free money on the table if the rates are like 4.25% right now or something. You're trying to beg, borrow, and steal to get your name on a big asset. So I can understand that also in your guys' context where it's like, can I do it? Yes, go. Without kind of having the structure in place, like, okay, hold on, I need to budget for all the unforeseen circumstances. So in my game, a lot of times we talk to buyers and sellers from a percentage standpoint, like, depending, of course, it's a sliding scale on what size of home you're buying, but you want to have like X amount of percent kind of set aside for these types of things. Is that true for you guys too? Like, is there a percentage sort of as an earmark to say you want to have this that you're not overcommitting to?
Yeah, it varies on the type of the transaction. So, if you're in a real estate transaction, you're handling, expecting for closing costs and costs of repairs and those kinds of things.
Right.
If it's a business transaction, that percentage is going to vary based on what your commitment is. So if there's a lot of resources that you have to commit to perform, rather than you're selling X amount of widgets and you know what your cost per widget is and you've been doing these transactions, that is one type of a transaction where your withholding needs to be smaller.
Okay.
But if it's a new transaction, new partner, new opposing party, new service, you need to withhold a lot more.
Okay. So then let's distill it down then, like we've done for the other 3 threads. So if you had to kind of have one sort of takeaway, in the concept of not overcommitting, what would you say that would be? I'll start with you, Charles.
Sure. So since we did bring up Tony Romo.
Yeah.
So are you going to overcommit your assets? And then, I'm not sure if you're a Lakers fan, but there's our friend Kobe Bryant, who's definitely doing okay.
Yep.
And, that's something that, going into that contract, you wanted to make sure that you knew what you're going to get into when you're doing that. Similarly with real estate, if you're going to have a bunch of different assets and they're all real estate heavy, that's going to be a problem if you need liquidity, as opposed to if you have a variety of assets. So when you're going into that same deal and you are going to you're going to commit a certain amount of assets, you want to make sure that you are good on the back end.
I love it. Kyle.
I'm going to echo it, but I'll put it in a flipper context.
Okay, good.
The experienced flippers will tell you that, you can estimate what your construction costs are and what your timeline is, and then you should take an extra 20 to 30% added onto your construction costs, add an extra 20 to 30% of your overall timeline from acquisition to disposition to account for marketing time, delays in construction, all that other stuff. Same kind of concept where you're making sure that you withhold enough that you can withstand those bumps that are going to come down the road.
I love that thought. I've always used the rule of thumb, which is if you have a timeline, double it. And if you got a budget, double that too. But I like 20 and 30 better, a little more efficient.
Yeah. Well, it's the lower those percentages are, the higher the risk of failure are. But there are ways to work around those problems too.
Failure, gang, you might say that's sort of the overarching principle that we're trying to avoid in this lesson, this classroom of secret stashness today for Stash Nation. And coming up, gang, Kyle and Charles are going to put a bookend on this. We'll call it the 4th chapter of this lesson, and it has to do with planning for your exit. So perfect and apropos for being our last segment of the day. And Real Talk Radio San Diego, guys. We'll be right back. Thanks for hanging out.